In 1897, three men tried to fly a hydrogen balloon over the North Pole. They vanished. 33 years later, the ice gave back their diaries, photographs, and camp. But the most important clue was not where they died. It was in a test they ignored before takeoff. Before the balloon rose from Danes Island, off Spitsbergen, the project had already begun to fail its own engineering logic. Not in a dramatic way, not with a torn envelope, a burning gas plant, or a public collapse. It failed in the quieter language of lift, leakage, rope, ballast, and waiting. That is the real story of Salomon Andrée's polar balloon expedition. Not a death puzzle first, not a ghost story in the snow. An engineering project that found a warning in its measurements, then launched because the launch site had become harder to leave than the sky was to enter. The diary page is where the story should start, close enough to see the damaged paper, close enough to see how small the handwriting is. Dates, weather, food, drift, repairs, bearings. A man writing because writing is still a way to keep the world measurable. In August 1930, a Norwegian sealing and research expedition landed on Kvitoya, White Island, in the far east of Svalbard. There, after 33 years, searchers found the remains of Andree, Nils Strindberg, and Knut Frænkel. They also found the evidence that changed the story. Diaries, notebooks, equipment, exposed photographic plates, and the last camp. The find did not produce one clean final answer. It produced a file, and that file points backward. Andree was not trying to improvise his way to the pole. He was an engineer, a balloonist, and a man of the late 19th century when applied science promised to turn impossible geography into a technical problem. Ships froze, sledges crawled, men dragged their supplies across pressure ridges and open leads. A balloon offered a different answer. Pass over the ice before the ice could stop you. His balloon was called Örnen, the eagle. It would be filled with hydrogen, lifted from Danes Island, off Spitsbergen, and carried northward by wind. Its steering system depended on long guide ropes dragging across the ice or water below. Those ropes would slow the balloon relative to the air. Sails would use that difference to give the aeronauts a limited steering angle. It was clever. It was also fragile. Picture the balloon house on 11 July 1897. Timber walls, cold shore, men working around a huge fabric envelope, ropes hanging like part of the machine's nervous system. The roof and walls opened for departure. Outside, the Arctic was not a blank white void. It was weather, drift, water, ice, and time. The hydrogen plant had done its job. The published technical account says thousands of cubic meters of gas were produced over dozens of hours, and the gas quality was good. The problem was not simply making hydrogen. The problem was keeping enough of it for long enough. Inside a balloon that needed lift and control at the same time. The fatal assumption was not that Örnen would never leak. Every gas balloon leaked. The fatal assumption was that the loss would remain inside a margin the expedition could afford. Here the numbers matter, and they need to be handled carefully. A simplified claim sometimes appears that the expected leak rate was under 1 cubic meter per day, and that the final rate was over 2. I am not treating that as verified. The published recovery record gives a different scale. Swedenborg's technical estimate says the measured leakage in the balloon house corresponded to a loss of lift of at most about 84 kilograms per day, or about 76 cubic meters of hydrogen per day. Later reconstruction of the flight discusses roughly 480 cubic meters of gas lost by the evening of 13th July, with additional losses tied to ascent and handling. Those figures are not scenery. They are the margin leaving the mission. A failed test is not always a command to stop. Sometimes it becomes a negotiation, and that was the danger. The expedition had already spent one season waiting. In 1896, Andree's party had gone to Danes Island, prepared the base, filled the balloon, and waited for a wind that would make the attempt possible. It did not come in time. The ship could not remain forever. Insurance and charter limits mattered. The party left without launching. That earlier failure changed the meaning of delay in 1897. A second wait was not just caution. It looked like humiliation. It threatened supporters, newspapers, national expectation, and the identity of the expedition itself. The base was built for departure. The equipment was built for departure. The story Sweden had been told was built for departure. So when a usable wind came, the balloon was not the only thing under pressure. 11 July, the balloon house opens, the ropes tighten, the basket moves. Örnen rises from Dane's Island. For a moment, the plan exists in its most convincing form. 3 men lifted above the Arctic, the balloon huge and pale above the shore, the North Pole transformed from a frozen distance into a possible flight path. Then the launch begins to spin the margin even faster. The guide ropes, the very system meant to give Andree steering, were damaged or lost near the start. The published technical account later tied the loss to the screw connections in the ropes. Whatever the precise mechanics, the result was brutal. The balloon that was supposed to be partly steerable became much closer to an ordinary drifting balloon. The basket dips into water. The balloon rises and falls. Ballast decisions become urgent. Ropes that were meant to control altitude and direction no longer behave like a neat diagram. Örnen is still flying, but the original machine has already changed into another machine. This is the key distinction. The expedition did not fail only when the balloon came down. It failed when the assumptions that made the balloon an expedition vehicle stopped being true. By 14th July 1897, after roughly 3 days in the air, Örnen was on the pack ice. The recorded landing position was near 82 degrees 56 minutes north and 29 degrees 52 minutes east. The aircraft was no longer an aircraft. It was wreckage, equipment, fabric, gondola, rope, and memory on a moving ice field. Now the men had to turn a failed flight into a survival march. They had sledges, they had a canvas boat, they had weapons, instruments, food, notebooks, and enough discipline to begin again. This matters. They were not empty-handed dreamers. Their records show work: packing, weighing, hunting, repairing, calculating, observing. The tragedy is not that they stopped thinking. The tragedy is that thought had to begin after the main margin was gone. The first new question was direction. After landing, Andree and his companions considered how to reach safety or a depot. Cape Flora in Franz Josef Land offered huts, supplies, and the known presence of Jackson's expedition infrastructure. The 7 islands in northeastern Svalbard offered another route. Modern analysis of Andree's ice drift assumptions shows how difficult that choice became, because walking over sea ice is not walking over land. A map makes this visible. Draw the intended march, then draw the drift under the men. The line they walked was not the line they traveled. The ice moved while they worked. A day could be spent hauling a sledge east, only for the floe to carry the whole camp another way. The Arctic did not need to defeat them in one blow. It only had to make honest labor add up badly. The diaries are at their strongest here, not because they are melodramatic, but because they are practical. A bear is shot, meat is cooked, a foot hurts, a stove misbehaves, a route is reconsidered. Ice thickness is measured, birds are noted. The men argue with distance by writing it down. I read the recovery volume as a technical file before I read it as a tragedy. That is why the diary page should keep returning on screen. It cuts against the myth. The myth wants 3 men disappearing into whiteness. The page shows a working expedition after the balloon has failed. Tired, hungry, sometimes hopeful, sometimes trapped, but still recording. The photographic plates do the same work. Strindberg's recovered images are not just illustrations. They are evidence that the story had stages: balloon, launch, landing, ice camp, sledges, men still trying to convert one kind of expedition into another. That is the archaeology rewrite. In 1897, the public had disappearance. In 1930, the public got sequence. The last confirmed point needs discipline. Andree's large diary runs from 11 July to 2 October. His final diary survives only in damaged fragments around the Kvitoya landing phase. Strindberg's calendar notes place the party moving ashore on 5 October, relocating on 7 October, and then include a final terse note on 17 October. The safest version is this. In early October 1897, the records still place the expedition alive on or at Kvitoya, making camp and moving equipment. After that, the written sequence breaks apart. This is where the familiar death theories enter, but they should not take over the film. Confirmed. All 3 men died on Kvitoya, and the camp remains, diaries, equipment, and photographic material were recovered in 1930. Likely, cold, exhaustion, nutrition, food safety, injury, and camp conditions belong in any serious discussion of the final days. Unknown, the exact cause or causes of death. The bear meat trichinosis theory exists. Trichini and preserved polar bear meat have been discussed, but that does not make trichinosis the established cause of death. Medical writers have challenged it, and other hypotheses, including botulism, carbon monoxide, exposure, accident, and mixed causes, have been proposed. The record does not permit a clean verdict. That uncertainty is not a problem to hide. It is part of the honesty of the episode. The final camp does not explain everything. The pre-launch evidence explains something clearer. The mission accepted a narrowing margin before the Arctic had finished narrowing it. The failure was not one event. It was a chain. A balloon must hold gas. A steering system must keep its ropes. A launch site must still allow retreat. A team must be able to hear a warning before the calendar turns it into inconvenience. On Dane's Island, those links did not break all at once. They weakened one by one. The balloon could still rise, so launch remained imaginable. The gas loss was measurable, so it could be explained. The guide rope system was clever, so its risk could be absorbed into confidence. The previous season had failed, so delay felt costly. Each fact had an answer. Together, they formed a trap. Per Olaf Sundman's 1967 novel, and later cinematic versions, helped shape the story as psychological polar drama. That afterlife matters, but it is not the evidentiary center. The center is older and colder. Diaries, technical reports, photographs, and camp inventory. The strongest modern version of Andree's story is not that brave men made one irrational leap. It is that capable people inside a serious project can still teach themselves to tolerate the wrong warning. That is why the expedition still feels current. A date appears. Money has been spent. Supporters are watching. The machine still works in some visible sense. The test result is not denied. It is reinterpreted. The warning becomes a line in a report, then a manageable risk, then yesterday's concern. I am willing to argue that the most important page in the case is not the last diary page. It is the page that measured the balloon before the launch. The last page pulls us toward death. The pre-launch page pulls us toward responsibility. It shows the moment when failure was still information, not fate. The recovered diary did not turn the expedition into a death mystery. It turned it back into an engineering case. The record points to a harsher conclusion. Andree's expedition was not first defeated by the Arctic. It was first defeated by a permission structure. The balloon had already shown that its margin was compromised, but the human system around the balloon had become less able to accept what the measurements were saying. This does not erase the endurance after the landing. From 14 of July into October, Andree, Strindberg, and Frænkel worked inside a shrinking world. They hauled, hunted, repaired, observed, photographed, and wrote. Their discipline deserves to be seen plainly, but discipline after a failed launch cannot restore the margin spent before takeoff. In 1930, the ice gave back the pages. It did not give back the certainty people wanted. It gave back something more useful, a record of how a technical project becomes a moral decision. The page does not accuse anyone. It only records a number. And sometimes a number is the last honest voice in the room.